Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this study today. Certainly pray that this will be a blessing unto you, and just so thankful that you've taken the time to join us in this class here today. And we just want to continue our study. We are in 1 Samuel chapter 15 and going into the first verse here. And I'm going to share my screen. Okay, what you see right now is my screen from Bible Hub, and it is showing 1 Samuel chapter 15. And what we see here is the discussion between Samuel and Saul continues. As we remember, Samuel and Saul had kind of a parting of ways, and because of Saul's disobedience. And so now Samuel has come back to Saul and has another mission for him from God. And so some of the verbiage is kind of interesting. The mission is, I feel, disturbing for us, especially in this 21st century Western mindset. And we're just going to break it down a little bit and see if we can't get an understanding of what's going on. Vayomer Samuel El Shaul Oti Shalach Yahweh. And Samuel said to Saul that Yahweh has sent you. Again, I think it's key to point out the use of the word Yahweh as giving ownership to the compassionate, merciful side of God, especially when we see what's all happening here, because people, as we read into the next part of the chapter, would certainly disagree that there's any mercy here. But that's where we need to look for it. We need to see what was God's intention. We see he's not using Elohim as a directive, or as a way to bring an understanding of where his mindset is in. He's using Yahweh, which is the compassionate side. And so he's rehearsing that, Yahweh has sent, put his anointing, put his calling upon King Shaul, Saul, and over his people. And then I find the end of verse 1 is kind of interesting. Shema lekol divrei Yahweh. Shema Yikol Divrei Yahweh. It says, heed the voice, the words of Yahweh. It's sort of a redundant frame of the sentence here. You would say, hear the voice of Yahweh or hear the words of Yahweh. But to heed, which is Shema, is a word sometimes translated as hear, but heed is, I think, a better understanding, because it means not only to hear, but to obey. And the fulfillment of the word Shema is fulfilled when you obey the words. So he's saying, heed the words of Yahweh. It's also interesting here that the choice of the Hebrew word translated as words is diber, meaning words that are normally associated from the heart, that are meaningful, that are more than just everyday communication. And so he's saying, I believe to Saul, you got another chance, buddy. You got another chance here to do what's right. These are words from God's heart, compassionate words, reaching out to you, wanting you to be obedient and to fulfill the calling was placed in your life. And as he's reaching out to Saul to do this, you can feel the language here is expressing just a depth of emotion in God's heart. And so his task here, as we see in verse 2, is where we struggle here a little bit, is that he wants Saul to lead an army and go to the Amalekites and punish them for what they did to Israel when they were coming out of Egypt, leaving the land of Egypt. Obviously, they were not a fighting army. They were just a ragtag bunch of former slaves who have been freed, with old people, young people, very vulnerable, very weak. They weren't armed. and Amalek came up and ambushed them and fought against them and treated them very poorly. And so the Lord is wanting to take vengeance on the Amalekites. And so this is what you get in verse 2. And so what we come across here in verse 3 is where obviously the discussion becomes interesting. People who are looking to say, God is a God of vengeance. He's a God of just blood and gore, and you'll find that out there. And there are people who sometimes will go back to this story, and we look at the verbiage of this, and it is a challenge to understand. But I think if you remember last week, we explained it a little bit that in the Israelites' desire to become like all other nations, they had to experience and now um, be proven in a way that was not what God had wanted them to be. If we look at some of the previous passages, God had said that He would drive out the enemies, He would deliver them, He would fight their battles for them, He would expel the enemies from them. But when the Israelites said they wanted to be like all other nations, they now had to take on that role of what other nations did when they fought. And as we learned from Amalek, they were very cruel. They were very brutal. History tells us of the horrible atrocities that happened during acts of war, and it's almost too difficult to even describe here in our text or in our study. But when the Israelites wanted to be like other nations, God is saying to them, okay, you don't want me to fight your battles anymore. You're going to have to now fight like other nations fight. And I believe that's the basis for understanding why the Lord spoke to them the way they did, because I don't think the Israelites obviously understood all of the implications of wanting to be like other nations. And so the Lord is creating a lesson here for them, albeit it's very hard for us to totally get an understanding about. So he says to go to the Amalekites and utterly destroy them. This word jumped out at me, utterly destroyed. The root word is chet, resh, and mem, haram. And when we click on this, I guess what stuck out to me is that it's in a hifil form, which is causative. I would have expected, with the intensity that we get in our English translation of this utterly destroy, it would have been in a PL, which is an intensive form, and you can just see the intensity and the anger and the ferocity of this. But that is not really found in the word. It's in a hifil, which is it's an active form, but yet it's in causative, which means that this was just something that was caused to happen as a necessity of what is required in this interaction. And so also that it's in a perfect form too is kind of interesting, because it hasn't happened yet, but yet it's showing it in a completed perfect form. So that's an interesting point to me. So I want to look into this word a little bit more. We click on it, it comes up of haram. And again, biblical Hebrew only has 7,500 words to it, so words will have many different meanings. And you will see that here, that this word haram, as in Brown Driver Briggs, has the meaning of to ban, to exterminate, but also to devote. Now, okay, how do we understand this? How do we break this down and to figure out what this is? It's also used for excommunicate. It doesn't exterminate, I guess, could fit into the text of what was used by the translators for utterly destroy, but I don't see the ferocity of the word here. And so we're going to look at this a little bit more, that this is somewhat mysterious, somewhat a little mysterious. We're going to go to a dictionary of the Targumim by Marcus Jastrow, and I've already looked it up just to save a little bit of time, but you'll see on the left side here our hyperlinks to the different letters to start spelling your word. And so when we go to this haram, we see that the word in the Aramaic is to perforate, to break through. So they're breaking through the Amalekites. Okay, that makes sense. There's a lot of explanation here. Let's take a look at this a little bit more. Let's make this a little bigger so you can see it a little bit better. Um, it actually comes from the word for net. Remember that before the Masoretes took and put the vowel pointings on, there were no vowel pointings here. So it gives us a little bit of, because we're just studying, we're not trying to teach new doctrine or be a deep theological study. We can look at the word with some different vowel pointings because the Masoretes just added these in there. And so we can look at it and see if maybe there's some alternate meanings that may help us to get a better understanding. So this is used in a net. It's the word for net, for catching fish. How does that fit in with wiping out the Amalekites? Remember what a net does. A net, again, when you see the word for devoted and dedicated, a net will take something, it's catching fish from the ocean and bringing them into a common area. And now, once they're in this net, their purpose has changed. They're now, instead of being free, they're captive. Instead of being part of the living culture, they're now going to be someone's lunch, and they're going to be caught and eaten. And so they're being dedicated to a new task. So I can kind of see the overlap there. Also, went and looked this up in a etymological dictionary, Biblical Hebrew by Samson Raphael Hirsch. And when we look up where he digs into the meaning of this word haram means to segregate or keep separate. And destroying does do that, but it also gives us another deeper idea as we go back to the verse itself, that maybe God is not only wanting to destroy the Amalekites, but also to separate the Israelites from the Amalekites, separate the lifestyle and the methodology and all the things that go along with what it takes to be an Amalekite. And he wants the Israelites to make sure that none of those things ever permeate into their lifestyle. And so this task here of treating the Amalekites basically the same way they were treated is disturbing, because it's hard to read the verbiage as God directs them, that they should not spare them, not show mercy, kill from man to woman, from infant to nursing child, to ox to sheep to camel to donkey, completely obliterate them and show no mercy. And this is just challenging. And I can imagine this was the Israelites must have looked at each other and said, how can I do this? And in practice, when they arrived there and started fulfilling this, how disturbing it would be to see the images and to be the ones who were killing the children and killing the defenseless. And they are truly experiencing what it's like to be like other nations, thinking back of how they must have felt when the Egyptians came through and killed all the baby boys at the time when Moses was born, and how they saw the cruelty of the Egyptians doing that. And here they were now in the same spot, doing the exact same thing. And it's horrific. It's beyond words, but yet it is the consequence of what the Israelites asked for, that they were getting to see what it's like to be like other nations. And I'm sure that those impressions of what they did here never left them. And I'm sure it had a big influence on changing their behavior in the future, and for them to regret their decision of what they had done, and help formulate that today in Israel, capital punishment is very rarely ever administered. They are very merciful. Now, of course, the news may portray this differently, but they don't attack. They only defend. And they are have to defend themselves because no one else will. And so we see that the nature of the Jewish culture and the Israelite nation is to be mainly on the defensive because they are against bloodshed. They are against this. And I believe the roots of this started here with this task, and it had such an impression upon them that they never wanted to repeat it. And it uh, guided them through the future. So we're going to stop there, kind of a heavy way to end. But again, it was not God's original plan. It was not God's intention to ever have this be put into the hands of the Israelites to do this. And I hope this brought a little bit of clarity to you and see that, God's mercy was still reaching to the Israelites to get them to change their heart, and Saul to change his heart. And we're going to find out how well he accomplished this when we come back for the rest of the story next week. So God bless you. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.